What is going on, guys? This is Crowzen, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 companion build. This time we're finally on Gale in a build that I call MYSTRA'S Divine Lightning. It's essentially a lightning based build, so we're going to be doing that traditional Sorcerer, Cleric, Wizard multiclass, but with my unique take on it, since, I like to mix things up all the time with all of my builds. So with this build, we're going a little bit more into Cleric, so that way not only can we one-shot bosses with our lightning on the first turn, but we can also be a very good AoE debuff slash utility build at the same time, and I think that's what makes this build stand out versus all of those other traditional lightning-based builds that you'll see out there. This one just has the versatility to be more than just lightning. So it's a very fun build to use. It fits Gale so well because of the Mystra background, and I love this build, so let's take a look at it. Beginning with our starting class and our ability points, we want to start out as a Sorcerer, that way we can get the Constitution save proficiency at level 1. For the subclass, I choose Storm Sorcery, that way we can add a little bit of flair to this build and we can fly as a bonus action and not trigger any opportunity attacks. So for our ability points, we're going to be doing most of our spell casting with Intelligence, meaning our wizard spells. So 16 Intelligence here, 16 Constitution for our concentration spells, 14 Wisdom for our Cleric spells, 12 Dexterity for Initiative and Armor class, and then I just lower Strength and Charisma down to 8. And then for the skill proficiencies, I go with Religion and Insight here. I guess you can go with Deception or Intimidation if you do plan on using Gale for any dialogue checks, but I don't plan on anyone using Gale for those purposes. And then for our cantrips, we want to go with cantrips and spells that do not require any type of charisma to function. So in this case, Light, Mage Hand, Minor Illusion, and Friends. These are very good, useful cantrips that you can get at level 1. And then for our 2 spells, the same rule applies here. So Magic Missile, since this is 100% accurate, and then also Shield. These are going to be very useful to have always prepared on your Sorcerer. So now we could go through our level path all the way up to level 12, and this is probably the weirdest level progression that I've ever done on a build, and that's simply because every level gives you something unique that you can add to this build. So the level path is very tricky, and you're always going to be, left wondering, okay, should I go into this multiclass or that one? So what we want to do at level 2 is actually start by going into a Cleric multiclass. That way we can start using medium armor or heavy armor if you prefer, and then we can go with the Tempest domain, and then we can get our 3 cantrips. So what we want to do for these 3 cantrips is pick up Guidance. You could also go for Resistance here and Produce Flame. For the deity, we have to go with Mystra, since that's what Gale is all about. And then we get 3 prepared spells. Now the main prepared spell that you're going to be using here will be Create or Destroy Water, and getting this really early at level 2 is going to be so helpful. What Create Water will actually do is make enemies wet, which means they are vulnerable to lightning damage, which means that you can double your lightning damage on any enemy that you can set up with Create Water. So it's going to be super useful for this build to exploit the lightning damage. And then from there, you do have another very good spell that you can get in Sanctuary. And then for the last one, I just go with Healing Word as a nice bonus action healing spell. So at level 3, we want to multiclass into our 3rd class, and that is going to be Wizard. That way we can start utilizing our 16 Intelligence for damaging spells, as well as being able to spell Scribe Scrolls, so that way you can learn basically a whole bunch of different spells that you want to. So for the 3 cantrips, at this point we want to go with the damage dealing ones here. So Firebolt, Ray of Frost, and Shocking Grasp. This gives you 3 different types of elements here, which will be useful. And then for our spells, there's going to be one spell here that's going to be superior than all of the other ones, and that is going to be Witch Bolt. So Witch Bolt is generally slept on because it is a concentration spell, so it's going to limit your other concentration spells, and the damage initially isn't that great, but where it excels in is in single target damage. It's actually the best single target damage dealing lightning spell because you can get criticals with this. So when you upcast this to a level 5 or a level 6 spell, the enemy is wet, and you get a critical with this, it's just going to deal more damage than any other lightning spell for a single target. So it's going to be great against those bosses that you're just trying to burst down. So from there we can go with some other damage dealing spells like Thunder Wave and Chromatic Orb, and then from there I just go with utility spells like Find Familiar, Grease, and Longstrider. So now that we're level 4, I like to go back into a Cleric at this level. We do get Turn Undead, which will be very useful in Act 2, but more importantly, we get Destructive Wrath. And what Destructive Wrath will do is anytime you use a Thunder or a Lightning spell, you can use your Channel Divinity to deal the maximum damage with that spell. So it can set you up for some very high damaging combos when you get enemies wet and they are vulnerable to lightning damage. So now that we're level 5, we could keep leveling up in a Cleric here, but I like to go back in a Sorcerer because I feel at this level meta magic starts to become a lot more significant. So at level 5 you do get level 3 spells, so that way you can use haste. And with meta magic you can use the twin spell version here, and you can twin cast a haste not only on yourself but another party member. So it's very useful to get this at this level. And you also get Lightning Bolt at level 5, which will be a very good AoE lightning spell. So make sure that you do learn this on the wizard side of things with a scroll, and that way you can have that prepared. And for our second meta magic, you can go for Careful Spell here, although you will get an enhanced version of this later on with another level in Wizard. So the other option is just to go with Extended Spell, although you're really not going to use any of these too often, so you can just pick whatever you want there. The main one was to get Twin Spell. And then for our additional spell that we can get on the Sorcerer side of things, just go for whatever you want here. I just go for something else that's more of a utility based spell, so I like going for Featherfall here, and that way that'll always be prepared in case I do need it. At level 6, we're going to put another point into Sorcerer, that way now we can get our meta magic Quicken spell. So this is where your lightning damage is going to be fully online until you get that level 6 chain lightning spell. Because now you're able to cast Create Water as a bonus action, and then you can go right into an action with that vulnerability to lightning damage. So for our additional spell here on the Sorcerer side, there's really one good option here, and that would be Misty Step. That way this is always prepared, and you don't have to worry about having this on your wizard prepared spells. So now that we're level 7, you're probably going to get near Act 2, so what you want to do is go back into a Cleric at this point. This way you can unlock Aid at level 7, that way you can upcast this and have a very nice utility spell for your entire party. You will also get Spiritual Weapon, which is a nice little summon that you can use as a bonus action. But more importantly, what we want to do is keep going into a Cleric. That way we can start getting our Spirit Guardians as early as possible. So go ahead, put in another level into Cleric, and at level 8 you will get your first feat. For this feat, we're just going to go with a very simple thing here. Just go with the +2 to Intelligence, and then we do get an additional cantrip. I just go with Sacred Flame here, but any of these 3 can be useful. You will already have Light from the Sorcerer, so you could just pick whatever you want here. So now that we're level 9, we do unlock level 3 Cleric spells, the main one here being Spirit Guardians, and you still should be in Act 2 at this point and near the end of it, so there's still a lot of enemies that will be weak to radiant damage where you can really utilize Spirit Guardians. And then on top of that, you can also spec your gear for this, and that way you can inflict some very nasty debuffs with Radiating Orbs whenever you use the Radiant version of Spirit Guardians. You will also get some very useful spells that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get, and those will be Mass Healing Word, and you can still get Call Lightning by going 5 levels into a Cleric. So the next thing that we want to do at level 10 is go back into a Wizard, and that way we can get the Evocation subclass, which means that now we can use Lightning Bolt and our allies will not take any damage from Lightning Bolt. So this is going to be very useful. I really wish we could have gotten this earlier in the build, but as I said, there's just so many good benefits that you can just get out of every level with this build. It's kind of insane. And we do get 2 additional spells on the wizard side, and you probably already have most of these level 1 spells unlocked through scrolls. So just pick something that you don't already have here, and keep in mind that we do have level 5 spells active now. So you can learn Conjure Elemental through a scroll, and that way you can use your water and your air elementals, and later your water and air myrmidons, and they will get increased damage thanks to the enemies being wet. Now that we're at level 11, all we're going to do for the next 2 levels is go into a Sorcerer. So go back into a Sorcerer here, pick up your second feat, which will be ability improvement, raise up your intelligence to 20. We will get an additional cantrip. I just go with Blade Ward here, and then we do get an additional spell. This is really going to be personal preference. Just choose anything that you feel is going to be necessary for your build at this level. Just really depends on your party makeup. Maybe you want to have invisibility here, maybe enlarge. Invisibility is a really good one that I like to have on here just in case I need it. Also, keep in mind that you do unlock level 6 spells at level 11, so don't forget to spell scribe a scroll with Chain Lightning. And Chain Lightning is going to be the best lightning spell when you can attack 2 to 4 enemies. And finally, we're level 12, and the reason I put this level into Sorcerer is for one spell and one spell only, and that is Counterspell. We can only get Counterspell by going 5 levels in one of the classes that has this spell, so you might as well get this here and complete the build. Our next step is to gear Gale with the right equipment, and I mainly went for items that were going to give me a bonus to spell attack rolls or spell save difficulty class. So Hood of the Weave as well as Cloak of the Weave. For the chest piece, we're going to go with Dark Justiciar Half Plate. This is for the advantage to Constitution saving throws, which is going to be very important for your concentration spells. However, if you do want to go with more of a Radiating Orb route, if you are going to be using Spirit Guardians a bunch, then you can add Luminous Armor to this build, and then you will have a whole bunch of Radiating Orb debuff stacks on your enemies that way. You also have the Spider Silk Armor if you want advantage on Constitution saves earlier on in the game. And then if you do have the very rare version of the Dark Justiciar Half Plate, then you can use that instead of the blue version that I'm using here. For the gloves, I go with Luminous Gloves for the Radiating Orb debuffs, but you have so many good options with gloves in this game that you can use all different types here. Legacy of the Masters is going to be very good for spell attack rolls. You also have Gloves of Belligerent Skies if you want to inflict reverberation, Hell Dust Gloves, Gloves of Dexterity for initiative, or the Daredevil Gloves. For the boots, I go with Boots of Stormy Clamor for the reverb. However, if you do want to go with Boots of Striding, that's another very good alternative. That way you can't break concentration if you get knocked prone. For the necklaces, I go with Amulet of the Devout. This is going to be the best in slot. You do get that +2 bonus to spell save difficulty class, but more importantly, you get an additional use of Channel Divinity, which means that you can use that Destructive Wrath twice every short rest, which is pretty good. For the rings, I go with the Callous Glow Ring and Ring of Protection. If you do want to exploit that critical damage that you can get with Witch Bolt, you can add Killer Sweetheart to this build. I simply use Luck of the Far Realms instead, which is an Illithid power, and then you could also add the Coruscation Ring if you want to add additional Radiating Orbs to this build. Now for the staff, the Marco Heshkir is going to be the best staff in the game, so as soon as you hit Act 3, you want to start rushing towards that. However, you do have some very good Act 1 staffs that you can get, including the Spell Sparkler and Melf's First Staff, so you can use either one of these until you get to Act 3. And then for the shield, I go with Sentinel Shield mainly for the initiative, and you can combine this with the Hell Rider Longbow, and that way Gale is going to be starting very early on his turn, and that is what you want with this build. You want to have high initiative because that means you can set the whole battlefield up before the enemies have a chance to do anything. So whether that means you want to use a Create Water, or you want to start out with Spirit Guardians and debuff all the enemies before they start their turn, that's really what you want, and that's what you get whenever you combine the Sentinel Shield with the Hell Rider Longbow with this build. But you do have some other good options with shields. I personally haven't used the Real Sparky Sparks Wall, but this does consume lightning charges, so that might be kind of useful. The popular one here is Ketheric's Shield. A lot of people like to use this one on spellcasters, and you can definitely use this one if you do not want to use Sentinel Shield with this build. And then you also have the Adamantine Shield that you can get in Act 1, which makes you immune to critical hits. And that is how we gear Gale. So now we could get into the really fun stuff and do a combat showcase here featuring MYSTRA'S Divine Lightning. So I do have Elixir Bloodlust as well as Haste activated. That way the fight goes by faster and I'm able to show you more spells because I have more actions. So if you do have a bunch of enemies that are grouped up like this and you could get in a single path, then that is where Lightning Bolt is going to be the best spell. And this holds true with the greater amount of enemies. So basically, the greater amount of enemies, the greater the spell becomes because it can hit an infinite amount of enemies that are in your path. Whereas Chain Lightning can only hit a max of 4 targets. So Chain Lightning is really good if there are 2 to 4 targets. Otherwise, if there are more than 4, then Lightning Bolt is going to be the best spell, assuming that you could get in a single pass. So what I'm going to do is actually go over here and get Gale prepped, so that way he could get in a direct line of sight of all 5 of these enemies. But before we do that, we actually need to quicken spell and wet these enemies with Create Water. So I'm going to go ahead and upcast this to a level 2 so that way I get this target up at the top. And generally you want to stay out of the water because sometimes the water can get electrified, and that is not good for Gale. So you want to try to stay out of it as much as possible. And so now what we can do is go into a lightning bolt. I'm actually going to upcast this to a level 4. And the way the damage works with this, if you have Destructive Wrath, is that it's going to double the damage that you see here. So if you see 54, that's going to be 108, assuming the enemies are wet and you have Destructive Wrath, as long as they fail their dexterity save. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Use Destructive Wrath. And there you go. That is a lot of damage for 5 enemies. So it was actually a little bit higher than 108, simply because I had a couple of damage riders active there. So now what we can do is showcase a twin action here. So I'm going to use Twin Spell. And in the past, you were actually able to Twin Spell Witch Bolt, which meant that you could get massive damage on 2 targets. But you can't do that anymore. It seems like it got patched out recently. So you can still use Chromatic Orb, and you can use a Chromatic Orb Lightning here. Since this enemy is still wet, he is vulnerable to lightning. So I'm just going to showcase this as just another potential option that you have here for spells. So I'm just going to use it as a level 1 spell here. And let's go ahead and twin cast this on that guy and this enemy over here. And so I'm going to choose not to use Destructive Wrath. I actually want to showcase this with a different spell. And the cool thing about Chromatic Orb is that Chromatic Orb can also get criticals. So you can use Luck of the Far Realms. I'm going to choose not to do that for this one though. And yeah, just a level 1 spell. That did quite a bit of damage. I know I got a critical on this enemy over there though. So now what I want to do is showcase the best spell for single target damage. This is basically going to be your one-shot spell against bosses, and that is Witch Bolt. So what you can do with Witch Bolt is upcast this to a level 6, and assuming the enemy is wet and you have a critical ready to go, then you can get up to 298 plus damage with this thing. So let's go ahead and just put this on. Level 6, use Destructive Wrath, Luck of the Far Realms, 298 plus damage, which is insanity. Just think if you were still able to twin cast that, that would be crazy. So that is basically how you can use a whole bunch of different lightning spells here. And so there's still another couple of options that we have. So I'm just going to showcase those on round 2. So now we're in turn 2 and we still have a lot of variety that we can do with this build. We can actually use Spirit Guardians. However, since there's only one enemy, I'd rather just showcase a twin haste here. So you can also use meta magic to twin cast a haste. So since I have haste activated on Gale already thanks to Minthara, I'm just going to return the favor and put haste on Minthara and my Water Myrmidon, because why not? So I'm going to go out into my Water Myrmidon, and I do want to showcase Healing Vapors. Healing Vapors will actually also apply wet to all the enemies here, but it will heal them at the same time, so it's a very situational spell, and it doesn't really have too much synergy with Gale in this particular build, simply because Gale has such high initiative, and the Water Myrmidon just can't keep up with that initiative. But you still have some good uses for this. So in this case, I'm just going to move over here. And let's see if we can't just barely get this enemy in our Healing Vapors here. So as you can see, it does heal them. So it's a very situational thing. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend doing this if they already have taken any health. But now we can use Explosive Icicle, and this is a very powerful move, assuming that it hits the enemy, because this can do a lot of damage when an enemy is wet. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this here. And yeah, almost 60 damage for just one attack is pretty nice for a Water Myrmidon. So at this point, I'm just going to go back into Gale, and we can just finish off this enemy with the good old Magic Missile. And that is MYSTRA'S Divine Lightning. So I hope you guys enjoyed my build for Gale, which I call MYSTRA'S Divine Lightning. And yeah, this build is just a little bit different than those other builds that you're going to see out there, where they mostly go 8 points into Sorcerer, whereas this one we're only going to go with 5. That way we can get a little bit more utility out of a Cleric, and it just fits the vibe that Gale is going for here, with the whole deity being Mystra and so forth. So I really like this build. I think it's different and unique because most people don't put this many points into a Cleric whenever they're thinking of a lightning build. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think about this build, and I will see you in the next video.